everyone, so we are in our chapter 6 of McGraw-Hill. We are moving on to lesson 6, which is multiplying a decimal by a power of 10. This is probably one of the easiest lessons out of all of them. It might sound a little bit challenging, but I love it because there is a type of a pattern that will help you. Now this only works when you're multiplying one decimal times any power of 10. So remember our power of 10s, we have 10, 100, 1,000, and let's even do 10,000. Remember our powers of 10, they go up by one extra zero each time, right? This has 1 0, this has 2, this has 3, this has 4. Well, it's important to note that because what's going to happen is when we multiply a decimal by 10 and then we multiply it by 100, you're going to see that the decimal starts to move. And it's moving because these powers of 10 are getting bigger and bigger, which means our decimals are going to get bigger. So let's talk about decimals for a second. If I have 2.2, or 2 and 2/10, compared to 22 and 0/10, which one's bigger? My 2 and 2/10 or 22 and 0/10? This is bigger. 22 is bigger than 2. Now what happened to that decimal? Did you notice that it moved over one space? It moved over one space, which means it got bigger. And this would have happened if I multiplied it times a power of 10. 2 and 2/10 times 10 would come out to 22 and 0/100. Because there's one 0, I moved the decimal over once. So if I moved it over once, now it's 22 decimal as our answer. Okay? So let me show you some examples. Here we go. Alright, so what if I have 4 and 8/10 times 10? Okay, so think about your power of 10, count how many zeros there are. There's 1 0, so that means my decimal is going to move over one spot. So I'm going to rewrite it as 4, 8, and then my decimal. You can put a 0 at the end, and that's my answer. 4 and 8/10 times a 10 gives me 48 and 0/10. Now, what if I took 48 and 0/10 and I multiplied that? Or if I took 4 and 8/10 and multiplied it times 100, let's see what happens. Well, there's 2 zeros here, which means my decimal needs to move 2 spaces. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. I'm going to write it over here. So if my decimal's here and I go 1, 2, well, what goes in this blank spot? A 0. So put a 0. So rewrite it. Now it's 480 decimal. And you can put another 0 on the end if you want. So that means 4 and 8/10 times 100 gives me 480. Okay? Let's try. What is 4 and 8/10 times 1,000? What do you guys think? And hopefully you can see the pattern here. Okay, there are three zeros in my power of 10 that I'm working with, which means my decimal is going to move to the right 3 times. So if I take 4.8 and I move it over once, twice, 3 times, I want you to draw this so that you don't forget how many spaces over you're going, so that you know how many zeros to fill in. So now my answer is 4,800. That is the answer to 4 and 8/10 times 1,000. I would get 4,800, and that decimal is sitting right there on the end. So as you can see, when you multiply a decimal by a power of 10, it'll get bigger, and it'll get bigger every time you work with a bigger power of 10. And the trick is count how many zeros are in your power of 10, and that's how many spaces to the right you're going to move your decimal. And it's that simple. So this is nice. You don't need to stack it and solve. The other thing I want you to remember is that your decimal must move to the right. Because when we multiply anything, doesn't it get bigger? Whatever you start with, if you multiply it times 2, times 3, times 4, times 1,000, it's multiplying. It's getting bigger. If I want my decimal to get bigger, the decimal needs to move down to the right. And as you can see, it gets bigger as we multiply it because the decimal is moving to the right and creating a bigger number. If it's going to the left, it would be getting smaller, and that's what you do when you divide. So please make sure you're moving your decimal to the right based on how many zeros are in your power of 10. Let's do some more examples here. What if I had 0 and 54 hundredths times 100? Okay, there are 2 zeros, which means my decimal needs to move twice. So 1, 2, and then rewrite it, and that's your answer. So I have a 0, a 5, a 4, and then my decimal is sitting right there. Now, if we rewrote this properly, technically my answer is 54. So you could get rid of that 0 if you want and just say that the answer is 54 or 54 and 0 tenths. Let's do another one. What if I had 7 and 48 hundredths times 1,000? Okay, I have 3 zeros I'm working with, so I need to move my decimal 3 times. So in a 7 and 48 hundredths, 1, 2, 3, and then rewrite your decimal, put in the blank spots, place a 0 there, and now my answer is 7,480, or you could put a decimal at the end and another 0. But our answer to this product right here, or this multiplication problem, the product is 7,480. I didn't have to stack it. We're just counting our zeros. All right. Okay, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. That was pretty quick, but once you practice and see the pattern, you guys should be good to go.